Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Better Health, which is an ongoing conversation streaming live from Washington, D.C. My name is Choma Eze, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to the chat today. Today, I have a very special guest that is going to share his thoughts on our topic today, which is the mental health, discussing imposter syndrome, growth, development, and achievement. To all of the viewers watching on your various platforms, thank you so much for tuning in today. Please feel free to share your questions and comments at any time. So I'm sure you're probably wondering, why am I discussing, so why mental health? And I just want to say that your mental health is just as important as your heart, as your lungs, as your liver, and any other organ in your body. Black people are far less likely to seek mental health care. Stats tell us that about 25% of African Americans seek mental health treatment compared to other ethnicities. According to the WHO, 1 in 4 people struggle with a mental illness at some point in their lives. Despite this, there still lies a huge gap in seeking care. Though there are various reasons, one of them is the stigma attached to it. One study showed that 63% of Black people believe that a mental health condition is a sign of personal weakness. Many African states in Africa, such as Ghana, have been unable or unwilling to provide mental health services, opening the door for a religiously run basement prayer camps for people with psych problems. Without further ado, Dr. Doug Mitchell, could you please introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mitchell. Thanks for having me, Chioma.
Of course. Of course, of course. And if you could just introduce yourself and just give the viewers, just a little bit about who you are and the amazing work that I know that you do.
Again, my name is Dr. Doug Mitchell. Some people call me Doug. My mama calls me Dougie. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I started out in healthcare in ERs and ICU settings. Prior to that, I was in the United States Air Force for about 8 or 9 years. Um, my dad, avid reader, just a lover of life in general. So that's the general quick skinny. And
I
again, I'm
love
glad to be here.
it. I'm so happy to have you on today. This has been a talk in the making, so I'm just really happy that it is coming into manifestation. So, Dr. Doug, we will start. What is mental health?
Mental health is state of being where there are very few or zero to few mental stressors or emotional stressors occurring in one's life. I would say that mental health means different things to different people, but from a clinical standpoint, when we're healthy mentally, we're able to function at our job or in our job spaces and our families and our relationships. Mental health is something that again is again very subjective, but I believe that you can tell when a person you can tell real easily when a person's um, mental disposition or mental status is compromised.
Wow, okay. Um, Before we get into the meat and potatoes, and I just want to bring this up before we go into deeper, the different things underneath it. What are some common misconceptions that you have heard about mental health?
I think mental health or mental health is one of these things that we oftentimes we just put on the back burner, or we never really were conditioned or taught to believe that mental health was or should be a priority. I think people just say, well, um, everything appears to be going all right in my life. then I'll just keep going in this direction. Um, with respect to our family, with respect to our community, Black people have a really interesting relationship with mental health and psychiatric disorders and conditions. You know, we tend to put that thing somewhere over there in the closet. We really don't want to touch it, you know. And then if we ever are confronted with it, then we want to pray it away. We want to tuck it away, you know. So of course, there's a lot of their stigmas and just attitudes in general towards this this mental illness or mental health space that that I think we just don't really give the consideration that it needs. So, and to answer your question specifically, you know, there are people that don't believe that mental illness again is a thing. You know, we just think that is something that again we charge it to our emotions or charge it to um, the seasons. We blame it on the alcohol. We blame it on a lot of different things. But you know, we get our minds can dysfunction. Our minds can be in disarray just as our bodies, you know, can be as well.
Wow, that was actually very deep. Our minds, our minds can be in disarray just as much as our bodies. That's actually very powerful. Okay, so based on what you said, you obviously believe that there is a stigma in the African and African American community. Why do you think it is necessary to heal this?
What do I think is necessary to heal this with respect to the African American community or just in general?
So the stigma, with mental health, related to the I guess to the Black community, that stigma. Why do you think that it's important that we overcome that stigma?
Well, there's a saying that, you know, as a man thinketh, so is he. And we live in this era where, you know, I need to be careful about pronouns. So as a
Mhm.
person thinketh, so is he. And there's a, not to go scripture, you know, heavy on the scripture with you, but there's a script that says, um, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be
Mm.
ye, be not conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I promise you that I didn't prepare that. That just popped up in my head. So there's something to be said about the transformation process that is necessary in order to transition in life, but it occurs by the renewing of your mind. So if a mind is healthy, if a mind is growing and developing in the way that it should, then we're more inclined to be stable, functional. And you and I both know that we live in a period of time where we don't see a lot of stability. We don't see a lot of people functioning well. We see a lot of dysfunction in our communities, in our families. Um, you know, so you know, my belief is that until we can come to grips with the reality that we have been um, misguided, um, our growth has been uh, stunted and disrupted as a result of the information that we have received, as well as the information that has been kept from us. So if we don't, if which is all connected to the way that we think, and if people can control the way that we think, or if we're not in control of our thoughts, then we see aberrant behavior. We see problems, you know, throughout the families, communities. So it starts there. I believe that's the foundation, you know, a healthy mind, and people with healthy minds, training people and conditioning people to think, not just do and to be, but to think well.
Mm. You actually had mentioned the word thought. And I know it's a very basic, simple word, but I think it's really so important because it is what leads to beliefs and your actions and everything, right? So I first want to get down to, what is a thought and what is an emotion and what is the connection between the two?
Thoughts are
I know it's fast. I know it's a
you
very deep
coming with the heavy
question.
hitters.
We
It's
really need
simple,
to
but
know
it's
this
not
stuff.
that simple, is it?
It's simple, but it's not that simple. That's why you're doing this, and that's why you're so great at what you're doing because you're able to, to explain these things and don't shy away from it. Because I know you have a lot of information, so don't shy away, from actually breaking it down, the way that you want to.
I appreciate you having so much confidence in me. Listen, I think that I think a thought is defined as a manifestation, a perception, an idea. It's something that we have that's rolling around in our head, these ideas, or again, a thought is something that we can hold on to, not necessarily um, release. Um, the I read the other day that I was looking at the difference between a thought and an epiphany, and the definition of an epiphany is the sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. Are you still with me? I don't see you.
I am still here. Yes, I just have you at the center, but I'm still here.
So an epiphany is something that occurs suddenly. A thought is something that can occur, that can linger, that can, we can kind of just, we can sit back and nibble on thoughts. Um, that's my simple definition of a thought.
Okay.
Emotions,
Okay. Perfect. Yes.
emotions are feelings that are associated with, well, let me just say, so feelings and emotions are different, right? So when you ask me what emotions are unconscious or conscious. Uh, they can an emotion is a reaction to our thought, what we're thinking about. So it can be a visceral reaction. The feeling is the visceral reaction to, usually the emotion is the unconscious or the conscious or the unconscious or the unconscious
Okay.
being or this concept that resides within our bodies. So
Mm.
sometimes we have control over those things, and sometimes we often see people that aren't in control of their emotions.
Right, right. And before we even move on, I believe what I learned in school, and also correct me if I'm wrong too. I know that, after every thought, I believe that there is a chance for us to pause before a reaction, which would then, I believe, push an emotion. Could you explain that, like, kind of like that process of a thought leading to a reaction, which would lead to an emotion, if I'm saying that correctly?
um I wanted to let me back up a little bit. The definition, my personal definition of an emotion is energy in motion, right? And we have the power, the capacity to control or contain our emotions. We have that, but very few of us will harness that control. There's very few people who are in control of their emotions because most people aren't controlling their own thoughts, right? So, and again, if I can if I can control the way that you think, then I can pretty much count on controlling. You can count on me controlling how you move and how how your emotions are, how
Mm,
your emotions will sway. Um, so I agree with you. If we're operating on a higher level of consciousness or awareness, usually we can get in front of the emotion and we can say, okay, well, and then we can think about the emotion because the emotions occur after the thought, right? So if I can pause and say, okay, well, let me consider how I feel about what I'm thinking, then I'm in a better position to manage, my emotional variability, and which can lead, or prevent me from kind of slipping. I call people who have a tendency to allow their cheese to fall off the edge of their cracker. They just that cheese is right on the edge of that cracker, and if you bump that cheese a little bit, you got full blown crisis. So what
Okay.
we want to do is keep the cheese on the cracker.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Maybe I don't know. Does that make sense?
I mean, yes, up until the cheese and the cracker, but I'm sure someone will understand that.
Somebody will understand the analogy.
But okay, well, okay, next, let's get into imposter syndrome. My first time hearing that word was last year, sometime last year, and I guess it's been kind of going around, and it actually is a real phenomenon that certain people actually do go through. I'm sure, most people have felt it sometime in their life, but there wasn't a word to label it as. But now, there is a word to it. So, if you could please explain what is imposter syndrome?
So what I found is this imposter syndrome is something that it is a psychological condition. It's not necessarily a diagnosis, um, or a psychiatric disorder, but it is something that could lead to that if we're not careful about
Mm,
this type of it's, I guess it's negative or um, this self internalizing doubt. There's two components to the imposter syndrome. One is doubting ourselves, doubting the notion that we belong where we stand, and then the other part is the fear associated with being exposed as a fraud, or exposed or perceived as a fraud.
mm,
Usually, there's feelings of inadequacy, again, self doubt associated with that, and the irony is that usually people who are impacted or affected, by this are typically high achievers, which
mm.
is odd.
Wow. Wow, that's actually very interesting. What are some helpful ways that someone who is suffering from this can overcome it in order to win at life?
Um, I think what
Like
before
tangible,
I
practical ways.
sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, just like so tangible, practical ways.
Um, what's unfortunate is that, and you alluded to this earlier when you said that Black people are affected, and disproportionately by mental health issues, marginalization, um, disenfranchisement. We can go on and on. Just lack of equity, um, lack of the access to resources, and on and on. And this is one of those areas. This particular condition is something that occurs when, um, or to Black people, disproportionately as well. It doesn't um, it doesn't discriminate. It can impact anybody's life, age, any different, any demographic. That means age, race, creed, or gender. The imposter syndrome is something that can cripple a person, and if it's not managed, could lead to more serious issues, such as anxiety and depression, if we don't get a grip on this. So, and to answer your question, there are some things that we can do. Is number one, acknowledge that this is a real thing. If you don't feel that you belong in a certain space, I think it's okay to express that and acknowledge that. And careful, of course, who you want to express these things to. Needs to be somebody that you trust, or somebody, even a professional person. Those are a couple of options. The next step I would say is to reframe the way that you think about this thing, this idea of being an imposter, and to challenge uh, the self-talk that occurs in the self-talk, the negative self-talk that we hear in our mind. Ask yourself, is this realistic?
I was going to then ask, sorry to cut you off, how do you challenge that self talk? Because I think that that's one of the hard things, or that is something that is usually hard for people. Like, I don't want to feel like an imposter, but how do I challenge it so I can get this out of my head?
I think number one is asserting that I am here. I am here. I belong right here. Right. So
I
it
belong.
was. I'm. This is where I am. So in spite of what others may think, feel, or believe about me, this is where I am. This is where I stand. And until that changes, this is what it is. Right. So we have to we have to celebrate our accomplishments, and we have to acknowledge what is real. Sometimes we have a hard time accepting what is real when it's right in our face. There was a time that I may have shared this with you before. There was when I first became, an ICU nurse, and I would walk in those rooms and see my name on that board, and I was like, "Wow, that's me." And there were days when I walk around just looking at my name, because it was such a departure from my previous life. Like, I told you, I was in the military. My family was in business, so it was, which is which is one of the reasons why many of us have this imposter syndrome, because we're in new spaces, and oftentimes when we're in new spaces with strange faces. So simple answer to that question is, um, we shouldn't lie to ourselves, but we have to remind ourselves who we are. Sometimes it's not comfortable, to accept, being in uncomfortable spaces, but that's a part of the journey.
Hmm. Who are you, Dr. Doug Mitchell? I'm
Who am I?
I just have to ask because, since I guess or just one of the cures for that is asking yourself, who are you? Like, I believe I am a child of God, right? And I am here on this earth for a reason. So I'm curious, to ask you what is that gold or that power within you pushing you every day? Who are you?
No, no, no. See, you didn't. You did.
Am I going to
This is what wasn't one of the
Okay, okay,
questions.
okay. All right. We're not
No,
gonna
that's fine. That's fine. We can go there. I'll tell you. I'll give you the
okay.
quick story. I am a man. I like to consider myself, a man of African descent. Born in America. Stripped away from his roots and his culture, which caused a lot of instability within me. But nonetheless, you know, I decided that I wouldn't allow those things that happened in my past to define me, um, nor to disrupt the path that I had in my mind. I knew at an early age that I wanted to do something meaningful in life, and I also knew, and I made I created this mantra, and I kept it close to my bosom, and it said that I want to be able to give more than I consume in this life. Um, I do that through opportunities to engage with people like you. In moments like this, I'm a musician. My music is my passion. That's an opportunity for me to share something that is, again, very, very special to me. And I'm a whole lot of things, but at the end of the day, I'm somebody that just doesn't give in easily. I don't give up ever, and I will just continue, to be a light and a beacon, for those that I'm associated with and connected to.
Thank you.
How was that?
Thank you for sharing, honestly. Like, I'm really sorry to put you on the spot, but I only did it because I know you, obviously, but also because I think people really have to hear like, how you answer that question for yourself. So then that way they know how to answer it for themselves. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
So that's why I asked you that question.
And,
But we're going to move on.
and if I may, before you continue, can I say something?
Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
think it's important to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that insecurity, um, unassuredness, uncertainty, that's a part of the journey. We're not born strong. We're born connected to, attached to an umbilical cord, and we have to learn how to move. We have to learn how to walk. We have to learn how to put words together, and life is about, and might be the segue for you, is about growing, but not just growing, but developing. And it's the journey.
Yeah. So, so that's a perfect segue. So, why is growth so important in life?
Why is growth important? I mean, if we're not growing, you know, we're we're regressing, or we're losing, or we're missing out. Like growth is excuse me, the expansion or the multiplication of a thing. So I think that's just a part of life. That's nature.
Okay. Do you
Excuse me.
think that, oh, it's okay. Do you think that it is possible to tell when someone has stopped growing mentally or emotionally or spiritually?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. How do we honor, or what happens when we don't honor our need for growth? Because I do think that growth is a very inevitable, I don't know, basic aspect if like in life, we always grow, we grow in age and all that stuff, but we don't always develop, which I know that we'll get into that shortly. But I
Mm.
first want to ask you, what happens if we don't honor our need for growth? Um,
Um, I think it's interesting when you really like unpack growth. Growth is something that you can measure. It's something that you can quantify. You can mark time with respect to growth. With in terms of our money, in terms of our bodies, in terms of just in terms of this passing through life. There are certain markers that we should reach in terms of growth. And if you haven't reached those markers, then now we want to kind of we need to know why this thing isn't growing as it should, right? But then if we scoot up and advance that idea, development is something that is it's not quantifiable, right? Because it's more complex. It's There's much broader process to development when you talk about um, the changes, whether it's psychological, emotional, or intellectual. Development is something that it's very abstract, but there's no there are no limits or boundaries to development. And if a person, so we can grow but not develop, right? So
okay.
you can have tremendous growth in an area, but the development could be stunted. We've heard of that term, arrested development. So you can have a fully grown human being, but that is underdeveloped emotionally, mentally,
Mhm.
spiritually, right? And then when that occurs, now you have a life that is incongruent, and it doesn't. You can tell, if you have any sensibilities about yourself, you can tell when a person who's a grown man but talking like a little boy, or conversely, right? Grown woman but acting like a little girl, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's I think to summarize that, growth is about getting bigger, development is about getting better, and achievement is about reaching the goal. And you can't get there unless the other two are present.
Okay. Um, okay. So I want you to talk a little bit more about achievement now. So we discussed what growth is and what development is and how they are different. How does that relate to achievement? And if you could just, go in depth about that, just so our viewers like understand, so where you're coming from.
When I said that it requires growth and development to achieve. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree that
I
it.
know you answered you asked the questions, but I'd like to know if you
No, you
agree or
can ask me
disagree.
questions.
Okay.
I do think that they are related, and I do think that you do need growth and development to achieve, but especially for a high level of achievement. Um, I do think that it is needed, but I do think that someone that may not be as developed as someone can still achieve as well.
Of course.
But I think that's where your consistency and your persistence comes in. And I say
Hmm.
that because I've seen articles or I have read articles of people that are maybe like disabled in some ways, but their achievements are massive, you know.
Hmm.
They're like in the gym doing amazing things, or they got their law degree, or they, did this, and they're their disability didn't stop them. So,
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Because many achievements, the achievements are subjective too, and there are achievements that are oftentimes considered abstract, esoteric, or beyond the realm of these tangible achievements that most people define uh, as achievement. Achievement is not always something that you can put in your bank account or brag about. Sometimes it's for some people is leaning forward, right? Holding the cup up and taking a sip of water on their own, right? Or just, it could be something as simple as learning how to put one foot in front of the other foot again.
Mm.
So it's, let's, for a child that is that has been labeled as deficient in terms of their ability or ability to grasp, concepts. That child, given the right situation or circumstance or environment, that child being able to sit down and complete a task, and and get a check mark or whatever, whatever the passing grade may be. That's an incredible achievement for that human being, that individual. So of course, so achievement means different things for many people, and forgive me for jumping off the rails, but
Okay.
it's, achievement means different things for different people. This is an incredible achievement for you, just to be able to
Thank
show
you.
up and for us to have this conversation. And as far as achievement, I think achievement in whatever sphere and whatever realm, it boosts our self confidence, boosts our esteem. There's nothing like setting a goal and accomplishing a goal, right? I often talk about setting a fire. You have to know that you need to set a fire before the fire can ever be set. And there's something interesting about saying setting the fire.
Mm.
When we were kids, we used to say ready, set, go. Before you go, you got to get set, right? Before
Mm.
you can, if the go is the um, the call to action, before you got to get set prior to that. Before you can, these are steps that are required before you can get to the end or to the outcome, which is the achievement, right? But I always say, and I believe that, the people that are the most successful, the people that will say that just stepping up to that line is already an achievement. So and that's already a success because you have a goal in mind. So that's I got chill bumps just talking about that thing right there.
No, that's deep. It's
Yeah.
deep. I actually, you mentioned something about the power of environment. You, I just want you just to, well, I just want you just to talk a little bit more about the importance of your environment, because I think you said something like, that I don't, I don't recall exactly what you said, but you made a comment that if you took something out of one environment and then put it into another, that person or that thing can flourish differently. Could you just talk about
Mm.
that like a little bit more?
Mm. It's when we talk about environment, it's I think that if we would consider the soil that we plant seeds in, or that a farmer would plant their seeds in. There's something to be said um, about not necessarily, not just when they plant the seed, but at what time they plant the seed. Geographically, there's certain things that will not grow in certain areas. We have to be very careful about the energy that's attached or associated where we live, where we feed, or where we get our energy, where we spend the majority of our time. Look like you wanted to say something.
No,
What do
I
you
was
think?
just agreeing with you. I was just agreeing with
Yeah, that environment is just we we're creatures that I think that I believe that God created us in such a way that um, we have all of these things that are happening within us, neurologically, metabolically, um, all these systems that are in constant motion, compensating all of the time for these variances in environment, right? External stimuli, and is always impacting what's happening on the inside of us. So if we're not careful, then the energy that people bring to our environment, the energy that's associated with specific environments, if that's a big part of how we move, I think, and how we and just how we, in terms of how we manage our emotions. It's something that's very, very critical.
Hmm. Um, you said something about how we manage our emotions. I wanted to ask you, what is your definition of a mental health crisis?
Um, a mental health crisis is something that is easily when you see it. It's I spend a lot of times in emergency rooms, writing psych consultations, um, holding on to individuals that are in the midst of the crisis, considered to be a danger to themselves, a danger to others, incapable or gravely disabled is one of the terms that we use in emergency room settings to hold on to people that are in the midst of a crisis. So typically, those people. Well, I'm not going to say typically. 99% of the time, someone who finds themselves in the midst of crisis in front of someone like me has to determine whether or not this person can walk away from this encounter with me without doing themselves or others harm. Right? So that's big. That's the fundamental essence of it. So what does it look like? What does it look like in families? What does it look like when in marriages? It's people that are bumping into each other. There's no, rather than flowing in harmony. If there's disharmony, um, like all of the time, so much so that it's, again, disrupting the natural order of things, and oftentimes we don't really have a good concept of what that even looks like, because there's been disharmony throughout, or disruption throughout, the entire course of the person's life. Disruption in terms of a crisis is usually going to impact, it's going to impact how that person is interacting or conducting themselves at home, again, on their jobs, just in life. We have a major crisis in America, in terms of homelessness, um, um, homelessness coupled with mental illness, and we're seeing that it's actually an epidemic. It's much more than a problem. It's an epidemic. So when you have people that are in crisis, living on the streets, and then unfortunately we have people that have the power, the capacity to do things, but we live in a place where we can look the other way while people are in crisis, right? Right next to us. So yeah, it's I said a lot of words, and hopefully I answered the question. But
Yes, yes, you did. And before we get into our closing, I know you mentioned, that a lot of times when you have these mental crises, you are not flowing in harmony. What does flowing in harmony with a partner, with a family member like your mom, brother, sister, or just anyone who you are in communication with, what does flowing in harmony look like and mean to you?
I think that what that means to me is being able to have conversations with people, irrespective of what each each irrespective of the different opinions and the different values that people bring to a situation. We should be able to communicate and express ourselves openly, fully, um, again, in spite of the differences that we may have. That's number one. Um, if the ultimate goal is to live in peace, then we should be able to at least communicate, without injuring each other. So that, again, that's challenging, for some, because our emotions get in the way, right? And our emotions get in the way because we think certain ways about a thing, or we've been conditioned, or perhaps stunted. Our thought processes perhaps were kind of stunted because we had to figure out how to survive in the moment. Let me get back on the rails. Right. So many of us we're reacting rather than responding. So if we can slow down this process, begin to again acknowledge that our emotions can cause problems. They can disrupt, they can destroy, and our emotions can bring us together too. Our emotions can push us over the edge and get us beyond conflict too. As long as those emotions are properly contained, fire can save, it can keep us alive, just as fire can destroy, right? Um, I think that we should be able to celebrate each other. We need to be able to set our pride aside and celebrate even the smallest successes. That's something that we can do. I think that will build cohesiveness. And am I answering your questions?
You answered it perfectly.
Okay.
And I actually really love how you said that, because when two people are in harmony and they're able to celebrate each other and to love each other, that's where the magic happens. But as you said, oftentimes we let our emotions get in the way and all that stuff. Um,
That's
so I
right.
did so I did say that that was my last question, but I have one more question before we close up. What is the difference before a reaction and a response? Reaction and a response.
Before I answer that question, let me share something that I think is very important. We have to be forgiving of others, but before we can forgive others, we have to be compassionate towards ourselves and forgiving of ourselves. Right? We're not equipped with with a playbook or a guidebook or a blueprint, and oftentimes we're born into situations and circumstances that aren't necessarily um, the most um, pleasant, or in terms or pleasant, or um, that aren't necessarily situations that are aligned with proper growth and development. We're oftentimes we find ourselves going against the grain, in life, at home, at work, at school, then we mess around and then you end up getting involved with on a person, and then you marry the person and children. So you have all these things, and I think having grace and gratitude, being grateful for what we have, being grateful that we're a part of each other's life in spite of what the problems may be in our face. You know, at the present moment, there's always something to be thankful for, always. And if we have that, and if we move with that type of attitude, that type of energy and mindset, then there's no way that we could lose. As far as differentiating reaction and a response. Can I flow into that? So reaction is always, typically a reaction is knee jerk, it's impulsive, so whether it's negative or positive, um, I don't have to think to react, right? I can just be, and if I'm not careful, my reactions may cause a series of events that I'm not that I'm not desiring, or reactions often lead to undesirable outcomes. However, there are times in life where we need to react, and where we might need to react right now, right? But if we're reactive by nature, if we're reactive innately, then that's something we need to take a look at. Because responding to a thing requires us to sit down, process, basically go through the process of thinking. We didn't really, I'm sure we don't have the time for this, but there's different ways, different types of thoughts. There's a divergent thought. There's divergent thought, which is using our imagination. Convergent thoughts are rational logic. This is where you sit down and you apply logic to these thoughts and these ideas and these perceptions that are flowing through your head. Lateral thinking is when you use both of them, imagination and rational thought. So that's where the power, as you say, and that's where the magic is.
Okay. Well, that was honestly really amazing. Because less than 2% of APA members, so APA stands for American Psychological Association. Dr. Doug has he is a psych NP, as he mentioned in the beginning. I know you got your doctorate and all of that, which is amazing. And can you believe that there are less than 2% of Black or African American psych professionals? That's pretty huge. And you fall into that bracket of people that went over the fence, and you are out there helping people. And you're offering that cultural sensitivity and perspective as well, due to your background. So I just want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Thank you
Um,
so much. Thank you. Thank you.
oh, we have a question. Oh, what steps do you believe individuals can take to prioritize their mental health and well-being?
Great question. So glad you asked. Always seek the seek to position yourself. So, as I mentioned, I spent about 10 years in the military, and one of the things that we learned about the power of position, and if our position determines, will 99% of the time will determine what the outcome will be with respect to engaging ourselves with an enemy, or in the theater of war. So when I say, but we shouldn't always. We're not in a war. We shouldn't be engaged in war when we're moving in and out of these spaces. And if we're fighting with people, or if we're in conflict with people, the people that are, again, in our circle and our families, that's something that we need to be honest about. We need to assess and evaluate, again, not necessarily the problems that these people are bringing to me, but what kind of energy am I carrying around? And I got a bunch of ideas with respect to this question, but I think we need to stay positive, and we need to make sure that we are connected to positive people. And there are times in our lives when we can't have, we're lacking that. We might need to get by ourselves and so that we can get centered, and so that we can get grounded. People can pour into us. People can take away from us. And unfortunately, many of those people can be our so-called friends, they can be our family at times. I mean, we got some family members that will push you to your limits, to your outer limits, push you over the edge, take all your good stuff away from you. We have to be mindful that irrespective of who it is, I need to make sure that I'm connected, and again, remain connected to positivity, whatever that looks like. I need to connect myself to activities that will uplift my spirit. You know, that will things that I enjoy doing. Go places. I had a professor that used to say, "Find a peaceful spot in your mind and go there." There's an expression that says the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven a hell or a hell a heaven. There is a place that we can go here. The mind is capable of amazing things, right? You can go places. If all that fails, seek professional help. Even though there's 2% and of us out here,
Less than 2%.
hey, look, we out here. And you know what? Of that 2%, half of that are Black men, right? So Black men out here having conversations like that. Do good stuff. Read books. There's a couple of books that I'd like to encourage you to maybe to leave. One is The Four Agreements
Oh, it's a really good book.
by Don Miguel Luis. Um, um, there's a man named Jim Rohn that I listen to. His name is he's passed away, but his name is Jim Rohn, Rohn, and he has provided some of the most pragmatic information with respect to living life. You know, tangible skills to live your life, and not just to live for the sake of living, but to live your life in a dynamic way.
Thank you for answering that. Thank you so much. I do want to say that this episode was dedicated to my dad. May he rest in peace, and everyone else who is in heaven and who has crossed over. But I do want to say, Dr. Doug Mitchell, thank you so, so much for coming on today and taking out the time to be here. I know you have your own healthcare company as well. I will post your information with the post, that way people, if they do want to seek help, because it's really important, especially in the Black and, the African and the African American community, especially Black men too. I have three brothers, and they are very much into mental health, but I know that, it wasn't always like that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just trying to say that oftentimes Black men don't seek the help that they need, even females too. So I think, you're a great resource that people can have for when they are ready, if they do decide. And also, seeking mental health doesn't have to only happen when something happens, right? It can be a like preventative, care measure even before
Mm-hmm.
something happens to prevent it.
That's right.
So I'm really big, on taking care of your mind, meditating, exercising, and all those things. And I know you are too. I know you exercise and all that stuff a lot, and you're, into that stuff. So
That's right.
thank you.
I know. Yes. And my condolences to you and your family regarding your dad. I know he was a special, incredible man. So I definitely wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything else that you would like to leave the viewers with before we go?
I would say, to the person that asked that question, I would like to say to them, do the things that are necessary. It's more important to talk about. It's more important to do than to talk about, right? The things that we want to do, like in terms of our self-image, in terms of our self-awareness and self-consciousness. It requires that we apply ourselves. So we can talk about this and we can talk about that. Oftentimes people are, we're anxious and we're depressed because we're not doing the things that we need to do, or we're not. There's no guide. There's no guide. There's no goal. Someone said that a life worth unexamined life is a life that is not worth living. We have to examine where we are. When I talked about those markers. So if those markers, and we we should be very careful and intentional about setting goals for ourselves, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, biannually, yearly. These are the things that are required in order for us to continue to rise, not just to rise up, but to also be to be supportive of those that are in a position that are not in the position to take care of themselves, the vulnerable amongst us, and and to and to the way to the best way to counter, this imposter syndrome that you mentioned in the beginning is 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 to become a better individual, to become a better person incrementally, right? Success is incremental adjustments in our behavior and our attitude and our mindset each and every day. I'm Dr. Mitchell. You can follow me, Douglas Mitchell Jr. on IG. I'm also there at mental C_health. It's been such a pleasure. I'm hoping that I shared something that was worth sharing.
Yes, you did. Thank you guys. And we will decide if there's going to be a part 2 next week. Um, so stay tuned. Everyone, have a good night, good evening, good morning.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Thanks,
Bye.
gentlemen.